I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Distinguished Prime Minister Rama, I'm grateful to the Albanian presidency for the organization of this meeting, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. Since the start of the full-scale aggression launched by the state, which for some reason is still present here among the permanent members of the UN Security Council, there's already been 574 days of pain, losses and struggle. Russia has killed at least tens of thousands of our people and turned millions into refugees by destroying their homes. Most of the world recognizes the truth about this war. It is a criminal and unprovoked aggression by Russia against our nation aimed at seizing Ukraine's territory and resources. But it's not just that. The terrorist state is willing, through its aggression, to undermine all the grounds of international norms meant to protect the world from the wars. And I'm grateful to all those who have recognized Russian aggression as the violation of the UN Charter. Ukraine exercises its right to self-defense, helping Ukraine with weapons in this exercise by imposing sanctions and exerting comprehensive pressure on the aggressor, as well as voting for relevant resolution, would mean helping to defend the UN Charter. The resolutions of the General Assembly have clearly recognized the fact that the only source of this war is Russia, but this has changed nothing for Russia in the United Nations. However, these are the situations that have changed everything for the UN. We should recognize that the UN finds itself in a deadlock on the matters of aggression. Humankind no longer pins its hopes on the UN when it comes to the defense of the sovereign borders of nations. World leaders are seeking new platforms and alliances that could reduce the disastrous scope of the problems that are met here within these walls with rhetoric, rather than real solutions, with aspirations to compromise with killers, rather than to protect lives. Life should be defended uncompromisingly to ensure successful protection. But I would not be here today if Ukraine had no proposals precisely regarding some specific solutions. Yesterday, in my address to the UN General Assembly, I said that Ukrainian peace formula had become the basis to update the existing security architecture in the world, to restore the real power of the UN Charter and the rule-based international order. Now, I would like to present some very specific details based on the peace formula. Notably, it's point 5. And it's called Implementation of the UN Charter and the Restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and the world order. All in the world can see what makes the UN incapable. Unfortunately, this seat in the Security Council, which Russia occupies illegally through backstage manipulations following the collapse of the Soviet Union, have been taken by liars, whose job is to whitewash the aggression and the genocide being carried out by Russia. And all the UN actions, either by the Security Council or by the General Assembly, that could have stopped this aggression are shattered by the privilege granted to the aggressor with this seat. Veto power in the hands of the aggressor is what has pushed the UN into a deadlock. Today, no matter what nation you might be, a nation with hundreds of millions of people, or a small nation, a nation that bravely defends its independence, or a country whose long history of independence can help others, a state in need of help, or a nation that could provide some genuine support, a state relying on its army, or a state considering the UN Charter, but not the army, as its first and last line of defense. Regardless of who you are, the current UN system still makes you less influential than the veto power possessed by a few and misused by one. Russia. That is to the detriment of all other UN members. These days, in the General Assembly, we can hear the word inequality too often. Inequality is mentioned by different nations, both larger and smaller. It is precisely inequality that renders the UN ineffective. I regret that so far the UN Security Council is just the largest and the most visible platform in the world. I believe, and I know that UN is capable of more. I'm confident that the UN Charter can actually work for the sake of peace and security globally. However, for this to happen, the years-long discussions and projects on UN reform must be translated into a viable process of UN reform. And it should not be only about representation here in the Security Council. The use of veto power, that is what requires the reform. And this could be a key reform. That is something that can restore the power of the UN Charter. Ladies and gentlemen, 574 days of the full-fledged Russian aggression means 574 reasons for changes in this chamber. And the numbers of votes in favor of these challenges actually amounts to billions. The absolute majority of people in the world want to live in the world free of aggression. In contrast to all us, there's only a few obsessed individuals in Moscow. Veto right should not serve those who are obsessed with hatred and war. What we observe in the United Nations is an increasing support for the idea that in cases of mass atrocities against human rights, veto power should be voluntarily suspended, but we can also observe that Russia will not give up this stolen privilege voluntarily. Therefore, the UN General Assembly should be given a real power to overcome the veto. This will be the first necessary step. If it is impossible to stop the war because all efforts are vetoed by the aggressor, or those who condone the aggressor, it is necessary to bring this issue to the attention of the General Assembly. In the event of two-thirds of the votes reflecting the will of nations from Asia, Africa, Europe, both Americas, and the Pacific region, in other words, a global qualified majority, the veto should be effectively overcome, and such resolution of the General Assembly must be legally binding for all member states. The second step, the UN Security Council must be fully accountable to the nations of the world. I welcome the proposals of various leaders to expand the representation of nations in the Security Council. The composition of the permanent members of the Security Council should reflect the current realities, and justice. Ukraine considers it unjust when billions of people do not have their permanent representation in the Security Council. The African unity must be here permanently. Asia deserves broader permanent representation. It cannot be considered normal when nations like Japan, India, or the Islamic world remains outside the permanent membership of the Security Council. One should take into account the changes that have taken place in Europe, notably that Germany has become one of the key global guarantors of peace and security. This is a fact. Therefore, it is also a matter of fact that Germany deserves a place among the permanent members of the Security Council. Latin America must be represented here permanently, and the Pacific states as well. However, we should not confine our attention to those in top seats only. There is a need to expand the participation and access to the activities of the UN Security Council and subsidiary bodies for all members of the UN General Assembly who are not recognized as aggressors. At the same time, any participation of the Security Council membership should be suspended for a period of time when such a state resorts to aggression against another nation in violation of the UN Charter. The third step, there is a need for a system to prevent aggression through early response to actions violating territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. It is time to do that. The nations of the world should agree on such a mechanism for responding to aggressions to protect others that everyone would want for their own security. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has shown what can serve such a mechanism. Among other things, powerful sanctions against the aggressor, not only at a stage when Bucha has already happened, but also at the stage of the build-up of the invasion army. Anyone who wants to start a war should see before their fatal mistake what exactly they will lose when the war would start. The issue of applying such preventive sanctions should be automatically submitted for consideration of the UN Security Council when any member of the UN General Assembly reports a threat of aggression. Ukrainian soldiers now are doing, at the expense of their blood, what the UN Security Council should do by its voting. They're stopping aggression and upholding the principles of the UN Charter. And now, talking about the territorial integrity. This is an element of both the UN Charter and our peace formula that is inextricably linked to the issue of cleaning the territory from the occupiers. Occupation is an inexhaustible source of dynamite under the international rule-based order. So I will provide examples of concrete steps to be taken for the security architecture to be strong, using Ukraine as an example. Very specific things, just like Ukrainians. First, complete withdrawal of all Russian troops and military formations, including the Russian Black Sea Fleet or its leaky remnants, as well as the withdrawal of all mercenaries and paramilitary formations of Russia from the entire sovereign territory of Ukraine within our internationally recognized borders as of 1991. Second, full restoration of Ukraine's effective control over the entire state border and exclusive economic zone, including in the Black and Azov Seas, as well as in the Kerch Strait. In fact, only the implementation of these 2 points will result in an honest, reliable, and complete cessation of hostilities. Ladies and gentlemen, reform of such international institutions were made following tragedies, following major wars. We should not wait for the aggression to be over. We need to act now. Our aspiration for peace should drive the reform. As I was preparing the Ukrainian peace formula, I underpinned its points by the principles of the UN Charter. Only the principles of the UN Charter and resolutions adopted by the General Assembly. This is precisely what enables the Ukrainian peace formula to become global. The nations that engage with the formula realize that they're working for the rule-based international order, for the protection of territorial integrity and sovereignty of states, protection of human rights, prevention of aggression, and genocidal policy. Naturally, the epicenter of such efforts should be in this very chamber, the UN Security Council chamber, and even to the greater extent in the General Assembly Hall. If reform of UN institutions is necessary for that, then we should not be afraid of such reform. We are ready to work together with UN members who have joined the peace formula to work on relevant draft resolutions and amendments to the UN Charter. And I would like to make it clear for everyone in the world that Ukraine is proposing, while addressing to nations of the world and calling them to join the implementation of the peace formula. Every country can demonstrate its leadership within the framework of one or more or maybe all points of the peace formula. We can establish groups based on the points of the peace formula, where national security advisors to heads of states and diplomatic representatives work. Now, these groups are tasked to elaborate a list of decisions and legislative proposals to be implemented in order for the relevant point of the peace formula to be fulfilled. We're ready to hold 10 conferences at the level of advisors, and in accordance with the 10 points of the peace formula, then a summit on the level of leaders. Later, these drafts would be prepared and submitted for consideration by heads of states at the respective summit. Thereby, all nations of the world that respect peace can actively participate in restoration of peace. Cooperation is always the key word for Ukraine in international relations. This word is also key for peace. So let the peace prevail. May our institutions and our cooperation be stronger. I thank you for your attention, and thank you for the possibility to address you. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine.